everyone, in this our second tutorial class we'll be plunging into post-colonial literature. We'll be going over the key concepts of post-colonialism, what it is, how it originated, what the characteristics shared by all this body of writing are, and we'll also refer to the main authors that are considered post-colonial and their most significant works. So what is post-colonial literature? It's basically a body of literature works written by people from formerly colonized countries, especially those that had been colonized by European powers, such as Great Britain, France, Spain, and Portugal. Because of the prefix post in its name, the term post-colonialism was sometimes considered to be concerned only with the national culture after the departure of imperial power. However, the term actually covers all aspects affected by the imperial process, from the moment of colonization to the present day. The reason for considering this broader scope of literature is mainly due to the fact that there is a continuity of concerns and preoccupations throughout the aggressive process of colonization. You might wonder whether American literature can fit into this category of post-colonial literature, and the answer is yes. But it has been generally agreed that, on the one hand, as American literature has been widely studied through America and the world, there is no need to include it in this particular category, and on the other hand, writing termed as post-colonial has been concerned itself with countries that became independent in the modern world, so the issues they faced in a global and modern economy differ from those the US had to go through. Why is it important to study post-colonial literature? In order to answer this question, you need to consider that by the middle of the 20th century, and I am quoting from the book Literary Movements for Students, the vast majority of the world was under the control of European countries. At its peak in the late 19th century, according to the Northern Ontology of English Literature, the British Empire consisted of more than a quarter of all the territory on the surface of the earth. 1 in 4 people was the subject of Queen Victoria. It goes without saying, then, that the significance of studying these texts lies in the fact that more than 3/4 of the people of the world today have had their lives shaped by the experience of colonialism. Let's go into the origins of the movement now. During the 19th century, the English language became an academic subject included in the syllabuses of Oxford and Cambridge, and from then on it was established as an international language. This period also saw the rise of 19th century colonial form of imperialism, and the study of English was used as a way to exert power over what was considered to be more plain, illiterate, savage people. During the first stages of colonialism, literature written in the colonies was usually representative of imperial powers. But little by little, people in this country started to rebel against the foreign power, and by the middle of the 20th century, many of them were gaining independence. That started a period in which writing was anti-imperialism, a literature which rebelled against all its premises. One of the works which was responsible for popularizing some of the key ideas that are now the foundation of post-colonialism is Edward Said's 1978 book, Orientalism. Said was a Palestine-American cultural critic and an English professor at Columbia University. He was born in Palestine, and so he was educated in the Middle East and America. In his book Orientalism, Said argues that the imperialist powers who engaged in colonialism created a version of the Orient. He was referring especially to the Middle East, which had little to do with the actual Orient. This is how he describes it at an interview for the University of Massachusetts. It seemed to me that there was a kind of repertory of images that kept coming up. The sensual woman who is there to be sort of used by the man. The East as a kind of mysterious place full of secrets and monsters. The marvels of the East was a phrase that was used. And the more I looked, the more I saw that this was really quite consistent with itself. It had very little to do with people who had actually been there. Now, even though some critics have wondered whether this umbrella term of post-colonialism does justice to the complexities and varied cultural, historical, and social realities of the different countries that come under the category, it is true that all the writing produced in these countries shares some common characteristics. So let's take a look at some of them. Because this is a literature of resistance, of people who finally had a voice, most of this writing is a counter-narrative to colonialism. These are people who had suffered deeply from losing their lands to losing their cultures, religion, language. Therefore, it is no wonder that these writers wanted to represent all this in an attempt to make some sort of catharsis. and of course to dispute the ideas imposed by colonialism. One of the ways in which they did this was by challenging the meta-narrative, the story colonizers like to portray, in which Europeans were the rulers of the world, the enlightened people who wanted to civilize the darker people, when it was actually about brutal economic exploitation in the eyes of the colonized. Therefore, post-colonial writers tend to show in their works how stories or narratives are constructed, how there is always more than one side of a story. That's why post-colonial writers attack this colonial discourse in which the colonizers are civilized and benevolent, and the colonized are savages, uncivilized servants. Their goal is to show that these stereotypes are nothing but the biased opinion of colonizers who are just trying to justify colonialism. History was also considered to have been told from the perspective of the winners, the colonizers, so post-colonial writers aim at rewriting history, at giving their own versions of what it meant to be colonized. So what do these writers do to challenge colonialism? On the one hand, by asserting their cultural identity, the richness and validity of indigenous cultures and heritage. They usually achieve this by detailing different cultural traditions in their writing, and other times it's reflected in the narrative itself. For example, African post-colonial literature resembles spoken language, as African literature was mainly oral. A further way in which they assert their identity and challenge colonialism is by appropriating the language of the colonizer. This means playing with the language, mixing it with the local dialects, making up words, so that at the end of the day it ceases to be English, but a hybrid. Nowadays we can talk about Englishes instead of English to describe all those variants within the English language. Now let me give you a glimpse at the most important representatives of post-colonial literature. The first writer I would like to mention is Chinua Achebe. He was a Nigerian novelist, poet, professor and critic. His first novel, Things Fall Apart, written in 1958, is considered to be his best work and is the first of a trilogy of novels, the others being No Longer It Is and Arrow of God. In this novel, Things Fall Apart, he depicts the cultural clash between the Igbo society in Nigeria and colonialism, especially the clash with Christian doctrine. This was a very important novel, as it was one of the first African novels to gain worldwide recognition. Another acclaimed novel was Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie, a British Indian novelist and essayist. He wrote this novel in 1981 and it soon won the Booker Prize. This novel deals with the epic story of the birth of modern India. Its title, Midnight's Children, refers to those born in the first hour of India's independence. According to a New York Times review, it is also a novel of India's growing up, from its special, gifted infancy to its very ordinary, drained adulthood. Therefore, Rushdie to a certain extent assumes the role of cultural informant who represents East to West. The next novel I want to mention is Hanif Qureshi's The Buddha of Suburbia from 1990, which is a novel that depicts the racial conflicts in 1970s London at a time when immigrants were treated as intruders on British soil. The writer himself was born in London, son of a Pakistani father, so the novel is said to be largely autobiographical. What Hanif was interested in, as he himself explained in an interview for the British Library in 2016, was the fact that literature, the cinema and the theatre told stories about people who hadn't turned up before in stories. So one of the things you can do as a writer is bringing new news, opening the door to new voices. A very interesting perspective on post-colonialism is also depicted in the 1999 novel Disgrace by J.M. Coetzee, a South African-born novelist, essayist, linguist, translator and Nobel Prize laureate. This novel focuses mainly on the disgrace of the whites in the new South Africa after the end of apartheid, when they had lost their power. Violence is unleashed in several ways in the novel, but interestingly enough, violence is exerted by both whites and blacks. It is by the author's refusal to relegate each group into positive or negative poles that he manages to portray a whole range of human emotions. Last but not least, Indian author and political activist Arundhati Roy produced a wonderful novel called The God of Small Things in 1997. The author deals with post-colonial topics such as the conflicts between Christianity and native beliefs, communism versus the status quo, and the caste system, but she does so in a mesmerizing way, using constant flashbacks and flash-forwards to unfold the characters and happiness. Well, I hope this summary has succeeded in providing a coherent background for post-colonial literature. I know it's a quite difficult topic, so feel free to ask me any questions you might still have through the forum. Thank you for listening.